1996, a penultimate year in our DOS gaming history series. Also an interesting one on its own. For the first time in history, in 1996, more email was sent than the regular postal mail. The first commercial USB port and cable were released. Perhaps just another connector back then, but now a de facto standard that all manufacturers use in one form or another in all electronic devices. Sergey Brin and Larry Page introduced Google, and even though they may have not realized it back then, they've changed the world forever. The jury's still out on if that change was for the better. Deep Blue, a supercomputer by IBM, was defeated by a chess master Garry Kasparov in a 6-game match, losing 4-2. The Grandmaster would be beaten terribly by the same supercomputer just a year later, but in 1996 he could claim that he was the absolute best and that the human mind was superior to the machine's computing powers. AMD released its K5 processor with speeds of 75 and 133 MHz. It was their first entirely in-house developed CPU and one to compete with Intel's Pentium. Microsoft released OM Service Release 2 version of Windows 95, supporting FAT32 file system for larger drives and partition sizes, and MMX features of Intel's new multimedia CPUs. At the end of the year, Blizzard released Diablo, but we're not going to talk about it here today as it was a Windows release only. Perhaps something for Windows-based series. We'll see. But I've been reminiscing long enough, let's jump straight into those games. Three Skulls of the Toltecs is a Western-themed point-and-click adventure game. You're Fenimore Fillmore, and by a set of quite unfortunate events depicted in a fully animated intro, you learn about three skulls that can be used to unlock the mythical and supposedly great treasure of the Toltecs. So, you set out to find all three skulls necessary to find it, and the treasure itself. You're not alone in your pursuits, however, as there are others after the treasure. The game uses a similar to LucasArts' Scum engine with screen divided in two, gameplay window on top and smaller one with command verbs and inventory in the bottom. It's a tried and tested formula, after all. After a certain portion of the overworld map is uncovered, it can be used for quick traveling. You can however also ride the donkey or hand-pump train trolley. While most puzzles are inventory-based, you are given few choices of answers in many conversations, and these can actually affect the progress of the game. A.D Cop is your typical early 3D rail shooter. You're a cop and you're out to get the baddies. Basic stuff really. While it may not be the best of the game story backgrounds, it is what it is. The game is divided into 6 missions, each split into 3 smaller stages with boss at the end. There are only 3 missions available to you at start, and the remaining ones are unlocked while playing. The arsenal of choices or lack thereof that you start with is a police-issued gun and a bazooka of rather unknown origin. But you get to pick up weapons from your fallen enemies, so there's more than the starting set to choose from. While A.D Cop is not much more than a weaker Virtua Cop clone, it's a pretty decent one, so if you like the genre, you'll love it. Absolute Pinball is absolutely not as good as I expected it to be. It's not bad, it's just not what I hoped for. 21st Century Entertainment did not use DICE as a developer for it, as it did with most of its earlier successful outings, but outsourced it to Unique Development Sweden, a new and growing company that just didn't manage to hit the same quality heights that the earlier titles did. Absolute Pinball, technically speaking, is pretty interesting, as it offers a whole plethora of resolutions to choose from, 2 of them are SVGA modes, and all are switchable in-game via hotkey, without the need to restart it. There are 4 tables in the game: Paris-Dakar Rally, Hollywood, Deep Sea, and Baseball. And they all feel unique, original, and feature their own special dot matrix display animations. But there's just something missing. It's not the graphics, variety of gameplay unlocks and bonuses, or the sound. It's not even the overall mechanics. It's hard to tell what it is, but if I'm to choose between Absolute Pinball and any other earlier 21st Century Entertainment's games, I'm going for the other ones. Afterlife is LucasArts' humorous sandbox strategy/economic simulation game. You build and manage heaven and hell simultaneously, and in each you have to prepare appropriate zones. In hell, they're based on 7 capital sins, and in heaven they center around 7 virtues. New souls arrive through gates regularly and go to respective areas that they belong to receive punishments or rewards for the former life. For them to reach their destinations, however, you need to make sure to have a working street system and connect it to the specific facilities. Souls that have no way of getting to where they're supposed to wander around the hell or heaven aimlessly. And it's bad for business. Cause yeah, it's an economic simulation at heart after all. And since all souls are your source of income, those that have no place to go after a while of wandering are irreversibly sent back to Earth. All the buildings require personnel to operate, and this can either be trained in training facilities or hired. Afterlife is a really interesting concept that is actually pretty well realized, with a lot of micromanagement, economic challenges and random disasters. If you like the genre, definitely give it a shot and don't sleep on it. Alien Rampage is a 2D side-scrolling action platformer. While the game was not praised for its graphics when it released, I don't understand that really, as from my point of view it looks pretty freaking good. Definitely at least on the level that some of the best 2D platformers on competing systems offered at the time. The sprites are huge, and I really mean huge when I say it. I mean, one of the bosses, a flying skull, easily takes like a fourth of the screen in size. Not to mention a very atmospheric dark design and beautiful multi-layer parallax scrolling. But that's all irrelevant really, because it's Alien Rampage's fast and frantic gameplay that's most fun about it. It's gory, action-packed and instantly addicting. Easily one of the better lesser-known games that came out at the tail end of DOS's life. Anyway, the game features 20 gigantic levels, some of which can take even upwards of an hour to complete, and a boss at the end of each world. Alien Rampage is an easy pickup for all fans of action platformers, Metroidvania games, and even run-and-gun titles to some degree. It's a game that should have been more popular when it released, but sadly never gained the recognition it deserved. It's an A+ title for me, and the only thing I find annoying about it is that it only ever saves your progress after completing the level. Which is hardly a game-breaking issue, but a slight annoyance nonetheless. Alien Trilogy was a huge thing when it came out. Or a huge pile, I should say really. Pile of steaming and stinky poop. New YouTube guidelines for what can or cannot be said are just the best. Thank you, Suzanne. Anyway, at the time, same as most, I didn't know any better and was fired up by the Alien license attached to the game. I couldn't see straight past it, and I didn't bother comparing it to other games in the genre. Even one of the more important ones that came out the very same year, and we'll speak of it a bit later, Quake. But coming back to Alien Trilogy, it's split into 3 parts, each of more or less 10-ish missions and each based on a different movie. To make things more convoluted, not in chronological order. So first part is based on Aliens, second on Aliens 3, and third on original Alien. Sadly, neither graphics nor gameplay are what I expected them to be, and just trail around the average or tad below. There are supposedly mandatory objectives to each and every level, and they vary considerably, but, and that's a big one, if you ignore them and just aim for the exit, you'll complete the levels nonetheless. That's beyond stupid and just bad gameplay design. There's few things Alien Trilogy does not fail at, however. First of all aliens look as you expect them to be, and seemingly go through a whole alien life cycle, meaning you can find eggs, meet facehuggers, chestbusters, warriors, dog aliens, and even the alien queens. These last serve as bosses at the end of each third of the game. Second that the game does well is the atmosphere, dark corridors and overwhelming feeling of dread. They're all here. Sadly, however, and you may disagree with me in the comments if you feel like it, those two upsides do not make up for Alien Trilogy being plain and simple boring. Archimedean Dynasty is a truly unique and obscure game that should have gained much more recognition and popularity than it ever did. And yeah, I know I should start with what it is, but I believe that it's worth mentioning what it was robbed of popularity and sales it deserved. I believe Wikipedia entry for it summarizes the situation best with its single sentence that simply says, "The game was commercially unsuccessful in the US," which by mid to late 90s was once again the single biggest gaming market in the world. Anyway, Archimedean Dynasty is an underwater first-person simulation/shooter that takes place on a post-apocalyptic Earth underwater. The surface is irradiated and unfit to support life anymore, and you're a mercenary and you run a series of story and side missions. I'm not gonna tell you anything about the story though, as it's shockingly good for a game that's largely a shooter, and is honestly worth experiencing firsthand. But what I will tell you is that as the game progresses, you'll gain access to new single-person submarines to pilot and variety of upgrades for them as well. But the best of all is the physics engine that feels real. I mean, real to me, someone who has no working understanding of advanced aquadynamics, gravity, speed and underwater drag and how they all correlate to each other, but can still tell you that it feels right. Oh, and before I forget about it, if you run it on real hardware and have access to Voodoo graphic accelerators, a patch came out for the game a little after it released that uses these and increases presentation fidelity quite considerably. Asterix and Obelix is an arcade game based on famous French series of same-titled comic books. It's not the beat-em-up you saw in the arcades though, even if graphics quality is on a similar level. Very cartoony, colorful and with beautifully drawn, vibrant backgrounds. It is more of a side-scrolling action platformer, where you're tasked with finding various artifacts all throughout the Europe, and on the way, as usual for these titular goals, you'll encounter thousands of Fromans to beat up, many boars to eat and numerous magical potions to drink, all in the straight from the comic book fashion. And you can play as either of the two heroes, or as both, with a friend in a co-op multiplayer. Asterix and Obelix is clearly aimed at fans of the graphic novels they originated from and younger audience, as it's pretty samey and repetitive. Meaning that while the levels change the way they look, they all play more or less the same, and in about 30ish minutes you'll be able to experience everything that the game has to offer. Baldies is a real-time strategy originally developed for the ill-fated Atari Jaguar, a first fake 64-bit system, and in 1996 ported to PC. Your main goal is to develop and manage the community of your small bold followers and to defeat opposing group of so-called Harrys. The game is a mixture of god game and real-time strategy with simulation elements. The game is composed out of 20 levels divided into 5 worlds, each with its unique theme and progressively increasing difficulty. You'll expand your tribe. I'm not sure I should call it a tribe really. Community sounds better. So yeah, you expand your community by erecting buildings, placing your baldies in specific rooms and then assigning jobs or tasks to them. The color of the robe that the Baldy then wears signifies what job was assigned to it. There are 4 types of Baldies overall: red, which are workers, blue, that can upgrade and maintain your initial house and other structures, grey are soldiers and can be equipped with weapons, and finally white are scientists that research and develop new inventions and weaponry. These roles can be exchanged by dropping Baldies into rooms of other jobs. The game is very unique and it's much easier to understand while playing rather than listening about it. Not many know this, but 1996's Batman Forever is built around Acclaim's Mortal Kombat engine. It's a side-scrolling action-adventure with one-on-one beat-em-up fighting mechanic. The game is a tie-in to year prior's movie of the same title, and it follows the movie's plot quite closely. All the characters and objects in the game are entirely digitized, but none of the actors reprise their roles for the game. You have an access to a whole plethora of bad gadgets at your disposal, and your overall goal is to find and defeat 2 main villains of the movie, the Riddler and Two-Face. Along the way you will meet some of the familiar faces like Robin and Catwoman, which is a nice touch. Batman Forever is a decent game and can provide some fun for a single playthrough, but honestly I don't see it as something that will be coming back to time after time. For whatever the reason, I never really got into those early 3D fighting games. Perhaps because they weren't as polished as they would become in the next couple of years, perhaps I just preferred 2D games like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter II, or perhaps it was something entirely different. It's hard to say now so many years later. That said, Battle Arena Toshinden is probably first PC-DOS 3D fighting game that was done right, given the capabilities of the hardware at the time that is. The game features 8 fighters, each with a different fighting style and a unique weapon, and each having their own strong sides and weaknesses. And 8 is a good solid number for a game to keep a certain degree of replayability and longevity. Interestingly enough, Battle Arena Toshinden is the first 3D fighter to feature sidestep and a full 360 degrees movement around the opponent, allowing for strikes from sides or even from behind. It's an interesting mechanic, especially that skilled players could use it to their advantage and devastate the less proficient ones from all angles before those could even react. 8 out of 10 would play again. Bedlam is an isometric action shooter set in a futuristic sci-fi battle mech universe. And just to be clear, I know nothing about the battle mech universe, so I'll be spitting names that literally mean nothing to me. So, your squad of 3 pilots a huge remote assault tank, in short RAT, and is pitted against the mutated monsters called biomechs that took over human installations. And it's easy to guess who's tasked with clearing the biomechs. I'll give you a hint. It both ends with and is pronounced you. Anyway, the easiest way to describe Bedlam would be to compare it to Crusader No Remorse we spoke about in the last video, or Crusader No Regret that we'll cover in this one, with a difference that you're not going around a huge complex, but are exploring a map filled with baddies. Controls are more similar to those of Syndicate though, with left mouse button to move, right to shoot, and you can switch weapons with the number keys. Your rat is about the size of a small bus, and not unlike in Crusader, nearly everything on the screen can be destroyed, which is a little something I always enjoyed in shooters. Bedlam is a simple but quite fun shooter that the only issue with that I could think of are the constantly respawning enemies. If what you see on the screen looks like fun for you, it may be worth giving it a go. Birthright: The Gorgon's Alliance is an unusual, deep and very satisfying strategy with role-playing elements. It combines first-person dungeon and castle quest and adventuring, tactical real-time graphical battles in a vein similar to what you'd expect in a modern Total War game, and a complex economic and diplomatic strategy. You're one of the heirs to the throne of Kingdom of Anwar, and your task is to gain control of all of the land. Also, it's A-N-U-I-R-E, and I have no way of telling if I'm pronouncing it right. Anwar. Anyway, you'll need to do whatever's necessary to win. You'll wage war, engage in diplomacy, use magic, and trade real estate like guilds and temples, for instance. You can also set up trade routes for profit. And all of those actions take place on an overworld map in a turn-based mode. Quests and adventures, however, are played out in real time. and they require appropriately preparing for them, making sure that what will be needed on them will be taken with you. A game of a scope of Birthright is impossible to properly describe in just a few sentences, but if you enjoy strategies at least a little, you should definitely not sleep on Birthright and try it out. Cause chances are it's one of those games that you never knew that you needed in your life. Blood and Magic is real-time strategy set in AD&D's Forgotten Realms universe that puts unit management and combat in the forefront, placing base construction aside. The game depicts conflict between two factions over a set of 15 missions divided into 5 separate storylines and playable from both factions' points of view, so in total there are 30 missions to complete. It is played from a top-down 2D perspective and is a style-based engine. You start with ability to create the most basic and in the same time most important units, Basal Golems. They are your main source of power as they generate mana. When enough mana is saved up, it can be spent to transform one of those golems into a stronger fighter unit, or much less often a building. The story that you follow is all tied to the missions and unveiled part by part with each one completed. Blood and Magic, while quite fun, is considerably slower than most modern games like World of Warcraft 2 or Command & Conquer, which is something worth keeping in mind as not everyone likes those scroll-paced games. Fans of the genre should enjoy it though, I think. I'm not big on RTS, so can't recommend it really. Basta Move Again, aka Basta Move 2, aka Puzzle Bobble 2, is an arcade tile matching game by Taito. It builds on the idea behind Original by adding a tournament-style variation on the two-player game allowing to play against CPU or another player, and branching map in a single-player mode, so that you can choose sets of levels to compete in. Other than that, it's still the same brilliant little arcade puzzler. And the gameplay is that simple to figure out, but at the time devilishly difficult to master. You're in the middle, at the bottom of the screen, and you shoot marbles at the top, where more marbles are attached in various pre-assigned patterns. You have to clear out the screen of all marbles by shooting yours at the ones above. That's it, that's the whole philosophy behind it. When a particular color marble gets in touch with another one and they form a chain of at least 3 connected marbles of the same color, they pop and disappear. If you fail to form a chain and the marble you shot touches any other, it connects to it and stays on the screen until it's cleared. If marbles manage to fill up the screen to the point where they pass the level from which your marbles are shot, it's game over. Basta Move Again is one of the most fun and entertaining puzzlers of the mid-90s. And if I'm to be honest, it's still one of the best to this very day. Oh, what a great game Capitalism Plus was. And is to this day actually. At the time it was the most comprehensive and realistic business simulation. You've got your company and you can do whatever you like with it. You can become a manufacturer in one of many industries, or a retailer with shops everywhere selling either specialized or mixed goods and items of any kind. Or even a stock market giant buying low and selling high, living off those profits and never actually building or manufacturing anything. But you know what's best about Capitalism Plus? You don't have to pick and choose one. You can do it all if you'd like to. In fact, you can have as small and simple company as possible, cornering a very small niche of the market, in a tiny plant manufacturing small components for some bigger products that others make. Or you can manufacture all the parts in one plant, then assemble them in various other products in other plants, and finally sell them in a chain of your stores. You can go as big as you manage to become too. It's a true American dream simulator where what you do with what you've given will result with what you deserve. And anyone who has an idea can spot an opportunity and exploit it, can become a millionaire. Or billionaire even. I freaking loved Capitalism Plus and spent hours figuring out various different scenarios, business ideas and trying to optimize my chains to milk the proverbial corporation cow of all the money she could provide. And more. It's amazing, and if any of what I said sounds remotely interesting to you, you should definitely give it a go as it's just ace. The Plus version of basic Capitalism brought quite a few new features like enhanced graphics, increased number of products, mainly in high-tech sector, new random events like revolutions and earthquakes, real-world maps of different business regions in Europe, USA and Asia, map and scenario editor, pre-made historical and futuristic scenarios, and lastly, multiplayer option via PBEM, so play by email. Which was an interesting concept with highly annoying execution in any game I ever saw it in. It just took way too long. Anyway, to summarize, until Capitalism 2 in 2001 and then Capitalism Lab in late 2010s were released, Capitalism Plus was the best game in this very niche offshoot of business simulation genre and is hella fun to play, even to this day. Some might say more than Capitalism 2 is. Command & Conquer Red Alert is a prequel to year prior's Command & Conquer. It takes place years before NOD and GAD ever existed, and depicts a fictional conflict between the Soviets and the Allies. In this alternate past, Einstein decided to eliminate Hitler before he could even become a threat, thus preventing the World War II as history remembers it. By stopping one evil, however, he unknowingly took part in creation of another one, Stalin's Soviet Union, that was then aiming to conquer all of Europe. Red Alert is still a real-time strategy with an isometric, semi-top-down perspective built on a 2D engine. As in original Command & Conquer, you have to mine resources to train units and erect buildings. But they are your everyday ores and gems, as Tiberium hasn't arrived on Earth yet. Gems are worth more, but ores regenerate in time. While building, training, manufacturing or defensive structures, you have to make sure to supply them with power. So the bigger your base will be, the more power it will use, and in turn, more power plants will have to be funded. In Red Alert, you can capture and use enemies' unit training buildings, if said building is critically damaged, but not destroyed, and you have an engineer in vicinity to do just that. Did I mention spies yet? Oh, they're a gameplay dream and work as you hoped that they would, 007 accent and all. But only in single player, where no unit other than dogs can detect them. In multiplayer, they're visible all the time, so their usability is questionable at best. And this is where we've landed on the biggest issue Red Alert has. While it's an amazing and really playable game alone in single player, it's not as good in multiplayer. At least compared to Warcraft 2. It's not bad, it just feels dated. But since it allows for a local multiplayer skirmishes between two players with just one copy of the game, I'm ready to overlook all its shortcomings, as most developers were not as friendly as Westwood was with this approach towards its customers. Conquest of the New World Deluxe Edition is a historical strategy covering the colonization period of US history, and you can play as either French, Dutch, English, Spanish, Portuguese, or even natives, each of the nations having their own specific bonuses allowing for slightly different gameplay effects to take place. All nations can also form trade alliances and engage in diplomacy, as you'd expect in a strategy like this one. Anyway, after landing on a new world, you have to find the best possible spot for your colony, preferably where it would allow you to grow crops, mine and expand, if you're lucky with some map bonuses to production too. Features like gems, jade mines and medicinal herbs provide just that. You can obviously expand on your colony by erecting farms, mills, smiths, churches, houses and many other structures, and they increase your population, income and overall well-being of your colony. City expansion is good and all, but at some point you'll have to raise military to defend your settlements and find suitable locations for the new ones too. Armies can, as you can guess, take part in battles, which take place on a small grid map with units on both sides and is played out in turns. It may not be the most sophisticated combat system out there, but is still heaps more advanced than that used in such staples of the strategy genre like Civilization, for instance. Conquest of the New World Deluxe Edition is overall an excellent and unique strategy that should appeal to fans of colonization and historical games alike. Crusader No Regret is a direct sequel to year prior's Crusader No Remorse. It assumes that you've completed the first game and won, and starts its story just under 2 days after the first one's concluded. You're in an escape pod and heading for the moon, where the World Economic Consortium's base of operation is established and where they're the sole power governing it. Learning about your arrival, Evil Corporation's chairman Dragon and his forces are trying to hunt you down, and you once more have to not only survive but defeat the overwhelming evil. Compared to previous game, No Regret cut down the levels from 15 to just 10, but they're more complex and well thought out, so completing the game should take more or less the same time. There are a few new moves that your character can make, and some additional death animations, all to add the flavor to this already fine game. Within the new weapons, Crystallizer and Broiler are definite highlights. First freezes your opponent, or crystallizes them to be precise. Aimed shot at such immobile opponent ends up with him bursting into hundreds of small pieces. And second, liquefies the enemy, for the lack of a better word, melting him with microwaves. In short, what was good in the first game is great in the second. And overall, No Regret offers a lot of fun and engaging isometric shooting. If you like the first game, this one's even better. Deadline is a real-time tactical game with strategic planning, viewed from top-down isometric perspective. You're in charge of a special unit of soldiers and you're pitted against various dangers in series of missions. So you'll be facing fanatical cultists, drug dealers, escaped prisoners and terrorists among others. In most missions you'll need to save the hostages and try to disarm and capture as many enemies as possible. Full-on guns blazing approach is neither recommended nor expected if you want to complete the mission successfully. As each mission has an extensive background history, you can research everything about it before attempting it, because even the smallest bit of information may be helpful. On the other hand, you have a set amount of time for it, so you'll have to split it wisely between preparation and execution, so that the hostages are not executed before you even start the mission. Deadline offers ability to communicate with terrorists in a limited manner, either via vidphone or in a negotiation mode. Upon its release, Deadline wasn't very popular. It's hard to tell why, as it's not a bad game at all, but such is life, I suppose. If you like tactical games and have some time to burn, Deadline is a decent choice and you'll most likely enjoy it. I love Death Rally. I have very fond memories of it, playing it with my younger sister and a friend, and having a blast of a time doing so. It's a top-down arcade-style racer that's in its design similar to Micro Machines or Supercars, but more expanded upon what these offer. For one, you don't only win races by being the first, you can win by being the only one left driving, because as the title may have given it away, there's more to Death Rally than just racing. There are weapons, active and passive, and 4 different levels of car upgrades. Engine to increase the top speed, tires that improve traction and reduce drifting, and armor that reduces incoming damage of all kinds. Before each race, if you can afford it, you can buy these, and also mines and rocket fuel. But your opponents are not sleeping and they're preparing for the races as well. The game offers 19 tracks and 6 cars, each next better than the previous and upgradable. There are 4 cars in each race and only first 3 earn money for it, the last one goes home with nothing. If he survives, that is. Unless he picks up any while racing, as there are ammo charges, rocket fuel refills and money drops popping up on each track, and whomever picks them up first gets to keep or use them. Monetary bonuses picked up from races depend on the car that you're driving, and the better the car, the more you will get. All the shooting and mines aside, your ultimate goal is to get to the top of the championship table and defeat the boss driver, your adversary, on a last special track. And while winning is fun, Death Rally is one of those games where the road to is more fun than the destination itself. It's a great and addictive game, and you should definitely try it out if you enjoy arcade racers. Would you forgive me and accept it if I just said that Descent 2 is same as Descent 1 but newer and better? You wouldn't? Oh, okay. Then it's a full 3D all-axis sci-fi shooter with an unparalleled freedom of movement. You're flying your one-man ship in a 3-dimensional environment, shooting enemy ships and blasting away enemy robots. Same as in original, most of the action takes place in closed-off maze-like in design complexes, but this time enemy AI have considerably improved, and apparently can learn over time and even counter your tactics. The game is 30 levels strong, with the last one taking place inside enemy mothership. It offers new weapons, new types of enemies, afterburner, energy to shield converter, and improved graphics and sound. So, as you can see, whichever words I dress it in, the original sentence still stands correct. Descent 2 is Descent 1 but better, and if you like the first game, you'll love the second. Discworld II: The Mortality Bites is a point-and-click adventure game based on Terry Pratchett's series of humorous fantasy novels set on a mythical Discworld. You're once again Rincewind, a laughingstock of a whole wizarding world, and you're tasked with a burden of coercing Death himself out of his impromptu retirement and back to his duties. Sounds interesting? Well, it is, and most importantly it's fun. And that's what majority of players thought too. And Discworld 2 was big, if not bigger commercial success than the first game. Obviously, as in most other adventure games, both conversations and inventory puzzles are required to progress, and they are as hilarious as you can expect them coming from an earlier game. While sound design is on comparable level to the first game, the graphics have been hugely improved and are now in full high-resolution SVGA mode. And if I'm to be frank with you, they look as if they were taken straight out of a cartoon. They're just beautiful. But personally I like those older pixelated ones better. That's me, however, and objectively speaking, second Discworld's overall presentation is on much higher level than previously. Discworld 2 came out in an interesting time when adventure games were slowly being phased out, with other genres overtaking them in popularity, especially RTS and FPS that were the new it. So if you're a fan of adventure games, it's one of the few last good ones. F-22 Lightning II is an arcade simulation of a F-22 jet fighter. I know, saying arcade simulation is like saying straight curved. They're mutually exclusive, but hear me out. F-22 is a simulation, but one with a very easy approach to that simulation part of it. Meaning you do get to fly this amazing plane from a cockpit and complete various missions in lush, beautiful SVGA graphics, but the physics, especially flight physics, are not extremely realistic and are tuned down to have more of an arcadey feel. Which, you know, for hardcore fans of the genre might be a bummer, but for Sunday pilots like myself not only make the game more approachable, but also more fun. Novalogic claimed that they work with Lockheed Martin to have flight dynamics, avionics and airframe properties as close to the real thing as possible, but it doesn't feel like other simulations I've played. Perhaps F-22 is just a very easy jet to pilot. Then again, it's not important to me. What is though is playability, and I loved playing F-22 back in the day. You can play the game as either single missions or in a campaign. That's a string of those smaller missions tied together. The campaign is not dynamic in any way, so your performance in previews does not affect the starting parameters of the following ones. Enemy AI is surprisingly good and you'll have some fun in dogfights most of the time. Sure, every now and then the glitch or an odd enemy behavior may occur here and there, but in general there's not much to pick on here. It's a good fun jet fighter arcade simulator and I wholeheartedly recommend it. Fable is a point-and-click adventure game developed by largely unknown Symbiosis Interactive and published by Sirtex Software of Jagged Alliance, Wizardry and Realms of Arcania fame, just to name a few. And I gotta say that for the dev team that I've never heard of, Symbiosis Software did hell of a job on Fable. You're quick for, and you have to leave your home and travel through 4 fantasy worlds, each based on a particular element, to find mystical gemstones. And all that in order to learn about now extinct mythical race known as Mycobards. Most puzzles in Fable are inventory based and the interface has been streamlined to the extreme as well. So instead of traditional verbs at the bottom, all of the screen real estate is dedicated to gameplay, and hovering your mouse cursor over an object changes it to the most appropriate action. If you want to pick another one, instead of left clicking you have to right click for a list of available options. It's a very intuitive and non-intrusive choice for controls and I like it. Graphics wise, Fable is in full SVGA high-res high-color mode and is just a pleasure to watch while playing. It's a good game that's plagued by one issue only, at least in my eyes. Same as in Sierra's titles, your character can die, so the game can end abruptly. And that's just something I don't particularly like in adventure games. Fantasy General is a turn-based strategy game set in a fantasy world with some steampunk overtones. And it's based on Panzer General's engine. It's not a simple reskin, however, but a full-fledged game that stands on its own and is my most favorite out of all games in the SSI's General series. Story-wise, as in most games in a similar setting, evil has taken over the world and you're summoned as a champion to dispose of it and set the world free. There are 4 heroes to choose from, each representing a different realm of power, and each having access to 10 unit types with multiple upgrade levels each. Well, not each, as actually some of the units are not upgradable, but definitely most. Majority of game takes place on a hexagonal overworld battle map and is working in the same way as it does in other General Series games. So requires taking into account terrain features your units are on and making sure that your army has the right mix of units to be viable in all situations. There are however separate screens for unit recruitment, research and financial management, but that's pretty much it. Everything else happens on that aforementioned overworld map. Fantasy General is excellent, it looks great, it plays great and most importantly, it's hella fun. Both in single player campaign and single battle multiplayer skirmishes. Another year, another FIFA, eh? Actually, back then each next iteration of FIFA really brought noticeable changes to the way the game worked or looked, or both even. Unlike nowadays, when each next version only ever improves on how EA can monetize it with micro and macro transactions. And maybe adds an extra speck of sweat to players' models' foreheads. So, FIFA 97 based all its 3D player animations on Newcastle's own David Ginola, or Ginola, I don't really know how to pronounce his name, and for that I am sorry, and featured revolutionary at the time motion blending tech that seamlessly morphs animations together. For instance, one of the running with the ball into passing, then receiving the ball into dribble and finally a shot. It looked more real than ever. Not as good as it does today, but that was over 25 years ago and was an achievement for the time. All that didn't come free though. The game not only required a beefy Pentium or a compatible CPU, but also at least 16 MB of RAM and 1 MB SVGA graphics card. FIFA 97 was an upgrade over FIFA 96, no doubt about that, but was not what everyone hoped for nonetheless. And not the FIFA that would eventually become the most popular football game ever. That would come years later, but I suppose EA knew what they did, just waiting through those weaker years releasing game after game, getting us used to buying a new one each year. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you make money. Well, that and microtransactions, but back then, just that. Released 2 years after its original inception on the Amiga, Franko the Crazy Revenge is just that, a simple, very basic story of a revenge told via side-scrolling beat-em-up. I'm not sure if it's the best genre to tell any stories, but it's a good vessel for fun action-packed ROM. It's a game for 1 or 2 players that can play as either Franko or Alex, a pair of buff dudes living in Stettin, in Poland, in very early 90s. In a time when the country just freed itself, crawled from underneath a communist Soviet's heel, and slowly started exploring what it meant to be truly free. Not necessarily in the most reasonable way, but after years of hardships, it's difficult not to choke on the freedoms you try to indulge yourself in like a child. It was a transitional period that was important to all Poles and led to years of progress that sadly are criminally wasted nowadays, but let's leave politics aside and come back to our game. Our hero's friend is killed by a local mob tax, and Franko and Alex depart on a bloody trail of revenge. And that's what the game is best known for. Its brutal, gore-filled depiction of fights. It's a standard and not too creative beat 'em up, but that brutality alone made it rather well known. Is that enough to warrant a success? Clearly it isn't, but it's a decent game for two playthrough. One alone and another with a friend. Preferably over drinks. Genewars is a futuristic sci-fi squad-based shooter bearing certain similarities to Syndicate. In the future, the planet is decimated by a number of civil wars, and the population is forced to move into vast underground cities. Caused by numerous stretching long years conflicts, people divide into two factions, male and female, and the disputes that they had soon turn into full-fledged titular gender wars. And this is where the game starts. You can play as either male or female side and have to lead it to ultimate victory. It is done by leading a small group of up to 4 soldiers through a series of increasingly more demanding missions. There's 14 for each side for a total of 28, and they all have different primary and secondary objectives. The first needs to be completed for the mission to be successful, second only raises your score count upon mission completion. Soldiers who survive missions intact, with all their organs and limbs still where they're supposed to be, gain experience and raise through the ranks, with the squad leader being the highest of honors. And the squad leader needs to be present during each mission, regardless of how many soldiers participate in it. Missions cannot be run without them. And when the last one dies, the game is lost. Genewars, for me at least, was a much better game than the Syndicate, more entertaining, more varied and better looking. It has some bugs, sure, especially with how soldiers use the lifts, or don't use them to be precise, standing at top or bottom like NPCs in most MMOs, firmly glued to a singular spot. They often require a couple of attempts before they mount them correctly, but all those bugs are superficial only, and the game itself is just great and a definition of a hidden gem. Those quick descriptions of the games that I do for each of them are mostly based on my memories, sometimes on a recent playthrough when I need to check if I remembered something correctly, or record games footage, and sometimes on online reviews so that I have something to compare my memories to check if I haven't misremembered something important. And as I was preparing this description for Genewars, an interesting quote in one of the reviews surfaced. It said, "Undoubtedly the worst game Bullfrog ever released. Genewars is a prime example of a great concept botched by poor implementation." I don't personally remember it being that bad, especially that I tend to remember the worst thinkers I play, but on the other hand I don't play RTS games a lot, so the fact may have escaped my recollection. Anyway, Genewars is a mission-based real-time strategy mixed with Pokemon. Yep, you heard it right. In most missions your task is to find various animals, sample and breed them, and then attack your opponents with them. You can also mix different animals to create hybrids that wouldn't otherwise exist in reality, but may prove useful in combat. It's an interesting game, definitely worth a look, despite the earlier mentioned quote, as you may just find it fun enough to complete. I do remember it being a bit on a difficult side, however, and that some units were very small and clicking on them to select them on a 15-inch screen was a challenge at times. I think. Grand Prix II is a F1 racing simulator and a worthy successor to the Geoff Cramon's classic World Circuit. It features a full FIA license, meaning you get to race against the legendary drivers of the time. Michael Schumacher, Damon Hill and Mika Hakkinen to name a few. It was the closest thing to the real F1 that most players could realistically ever expect to happen to them. If that wasn't enough, the game's driving physics engine is actually surprisingly good and responds to most changes you make to your car. And that's where the beauty of this game is hidden. Now, I am not a car fanatic and don't claim to be knowledgeable when it comes to tuning in any real way, but despite that, I can tell you that any and all modifications that you make to your car's brake bias, gear ratios, wings, sway bars, packer springs and a damper can be felt when driving and impact the performance and handling. And since we're on how the game feels, I can't omit the presentation. It's fantastic. Not good or great, fantastic. Sure, when compared to games of today it looks blunt and blocky, but in 1996 it was something else. I mean, take a look at the replays if you get a chance. They look so good that on a small 15-inch CRT it could be argued that the game was close to being photorealistic. Grand Prix II set a new standard for F1 simulations in 1996, and it was on a similarly high level of quality to Indycar Racing II that we'll cover in this video as well. It's 1953, you're Steve Mason, but you don't know about it, any of it. You just woke up, you're in the North American town called Harvest, but have no recollection of anyone or anything. People around you seem to claim that they know you, or that they're even related to you, but their faces don't ring any bells. The town itself seems to be very strange and eerie, and you're lost in not knowing who you are or what you do there at all. But you're determined to learn everything about yourself and the odd place you found yourself in. Harvester is a horror point-and-click adventure depicting just that, your story from the point that you walk out. The game features many full-motion video cutscenes, and all the characters are digitized and placed on a pre-rendered backgrounds. Most puzzles are inventory-based, but quite a lot of talking to other characters is required too, to push the story forward. Unlike in most adventure titles, however, among other commands, there's a weapon-shaped one that allows you to attack other characters. It's a plot-related action, however, and cannot be used everywhere willy-nilly. If you enjoy darker and heavier stories in your adventure games, Harvester may be something down your alley. Out of all the games for this 1996's video, Heroes of Might and Magic 2, The Succession Wars was the one I was most unsure how to tackle. The reasons are twofold. For one, it's a follow-up and a much better game than the earlier Heroes of Might and Magic, and secondly, it's my most favorite outing in the whole series. It's a better version of first game that improves on everything. For one, apart from 4 basic hero stats from the first game, it adds 8 secondary ones that can be trained in 3 proficiency levels, from basic through advanced to expert, and each offering unique bonuses to heroes that unlock them. And since we're on the heroes, to the original cast of 4, Knight, Barbarian, Sorceress and Warlock, the game added 2 new ones, Necromancer and Wizard. Each have their own unique units, and most of these can now be upgraded in castles to be stronger or have special abilities. Castles themselves got a facelift too and allow for adding more structures serving various beneficial purposes. The map has many more features as well. Most prominent of them are the teleports, that work as, well, teleports, allowing you to cover large distances in an instant. Everything about Heroes 2 is bigger and better. Combat screens are much larger and have terrain features that cannot be passed by creatures other than the flying ones. Overworld maps can be huge now too, and compared to the previous game they are just that, huge. And last but not least, magic is not based on memorization of spells, but spell points. Or mana, whichever name you prefer. Heroes can cast as many magic spells as they like on an overworld map, as long as they have enough mana to do so. And 1 spell per turn in combat, also limited by it. Other than that, it's the same game. Better game, but same. Most swear that Heroes of Might and Magic 3 was the best out of them all, but I always found Heroes 2 to be the most fun to play. Especially with the Price of Loyalty expansion that added few extra cool things like eye towers or blocking stones, to name a few. And most importantly, a map editor. Oh, and if you ever get a chance and you want to play the most epically crazy Heroes 2 map, there's a custom one called Gyros 2. Gyrostoo. It features thousands of units in all armies, those that heroes lead and those that are on the map. Nearly each square of a map is covered either with an enemy unit, resource or an artifact, and completing the map can take weeks if not months. It's a truly fun, crazy and gratifying experience, and I will always cherish those summers I spent trying to beat that custom map with my friends for hours on end. Oh, and also, pixel graphics aged much better than the pre-rendered one from Heroes of Might and Magic 3. So suck it, HOMM3. I can just feel the wave of comments flowing in under this video. Indycar Racing II, a follow-up to earlier Indycar, is a very fun racing simulation by Papyrus. It uses engine improvements they've introduced with their Nascar Racing and features beautiful high-resolution SVGA graphics, multiple camera views and excellent 3D modeled cars. Same as with Grand Prix 2, Indycar Racing 2 features a lot of elements that can be tweaked about your car to customize its performance to your heart's content. And same as in there, changes that you make actually apply to how the car behaves on the track and how it feels to drive it. And since we're talking about tracks, there are 15 unique ones, all based on real-life circuits, with Miami and Indianapolis being obvious omissions. The game is beautiful and equally as fun and playable as the earlier mentioned Grand Prix 2 is. It's hard to tell which is better if you're not a F1 nut, which I am not. I'm a regular run-of-the-mill nut, so for me they seem close, perhaps not indistinguishable, but I would be hard-pressed to pick one. And truly, both are worth your time. If you have it, that is. Upon its release, Iron Blood was heavily underrated and obscure, and sadly it didn't change throughout its lifespan. It's an arcade action side-scrolling shooter with some light platforming elements here and there. First thing that you may have noticed are the graphics, which look as if they were taken straight from Japanese anime. I really don't know why I said that. Perhaps a microstroke or something? Obviously, there are no other kinds of anime than the Japanese ones. Anyway, the aforementioned graphics, before my temporarily sailing off the lush seas of off-topic, are beautiful with a lot of attention put to all the details and are animated hella smoothly. They're a pleasure to look at. By 1996 it was hard to talk about sound and music design in games if it was not exceptional, as most games used and utilized modern sound cards by then and sounded rather well. Same here. You can choose one of the two characters, each behaving a bit differently, but both equally is fun to play. Iron Blood is a banger, even if on a bit more difficult side. And what is especially innovative in its design and gameplay mechanics are the end-level bosses, each different and requires a unique approach to beat. It makes Iron Blood a real engaging arcade game that all the fans of fast-paced titles should find enjoyable. Lords of the Realm 2 is a mix of a game. Part turn-based resource and kingdom management, where you have to take care of husbandry of dairy, grain and cows, manage your population and its happiness levels, while keeping them safe from external and internal dangers and disruptions. And it's also a part real-time strategy where you control individual units or group formations of units during battles and sieges. It supersedes previous title in the series, improving on all aspects of gameplay considerably, so that fans of an earlier game will no doubt love this one. The overall gameplay revolves around holding your counties secure, grabbing new ones, building larger castles and keeping peasantry well fed and happy, as they are the cornerstone of your kingdom. To be honest with you guys, I haven't played Lords 2 in like the last 20 years or so now, so I'm not sure if I would still like it now as much as I did back then, but from what I remember is that I found it pretty addicting. Master of Orion II Battle at Antares is a turn-based 4X space empire game and a sequel to the earlier title. At start you get to choose one of 13 available races or can create your own custom one. Unlike in the first game, however, you can play it either in single or multiplayer. You'll need to explore the galaxy with scout ships and then expand your influence using colony ships, creating new settlements on discovered planets. Then you have to manage those planets and their resources, building new facilities, improving upon production and research, and commissioning new ships for your fleet. As you do all that, you'll eventually encounter other alien civilizations. They can be reasoned and negotiated with, or if they leave you no choice or you feel like it, engaged in space combat. Said combat is turn-based and uses a strategic grid map. Master of Orion 2 is full of many surprises like random events, strange artifacts, or even wormholes allowing for movement between remote and incredibly faraway star systems. All that makes the game incredibly addicting and entertaining, and a unique experience unlike most other strategies at the time. I haven't met a fan of turn-based strategies that haven't had at least a passing knowledge of Master of Orion 2, and those that played it had nothing but good things to say about it. Is that a recommendation enough? I don't know, but I liked it and perhaps you will too. Megarace II is an interesting title. On the surface it's a 3D racer with weapons, nothing like earlier mentioned Death Rally, but that's just superficial because the technology behind how it's made is actually quite interesting. Only the cars are rendered in real time and all the tracks are pre-rendered videos playing back in the background. It allows for much more detail to the cars and fluidity of gameplay, but in the same time heavily limits interactions with the track itself. Megarace II features 14 cars to choose from and 6 tracks, and in between the races you're shown series of full-motion video footages as a TV game show backstory to what's happening during gameplay. I think they were supposed to be hip, or whatever the word for it was back then, rad or cool maybe. Definitely not POG, that's a new one. I don't know. But it's unimportant, because what they are now is just cringe, to the extreme. And that's why it's actually fun to watch them, believe me. As in most races with shooting, in Megarace II you can win by both, being the first or disposing of all other opponents. Nascar Racing II, as it's easy to guess, is a sequel to Nascar Racing, albeit much improved and better than the already fine original was. It sports a brand new graphical engine with realistic damage model, SVGA graphics presentation, improved gameplay mechanics and apparently excellent multiplayer. I say apparently as I never had a chance to test it out myself, so I'm basing this only on what I read online. It's obviously a NASCAR racing simulation, and while it can be approached as is, just by firing it up and racing around some tracks for a little while, to truly succeed you won't only need to learn all the tracks, but also how to tweak your car to them. Because when you learn how to do it, your best bet for winning is to prepare before every race, setting up your car for each individual circuit. It's that degree of realism that may be off-putting to some, but with NASCAR Racing 2 it's actually worth getting through the initial learning period, as the game underneath all of it is genuinely awesome and deserves to be experienced, at the very least by fans of the genre. NBA Live 97 is the first 3D installment in EA's series of basketball games. Upon its release it was praised for the quality of graphics, wide array of moves and plays, and a very simulation-like feel to it. Speaking about the graphics, all players are polygonal, and not flat like in the first 3D FIFA for instance, looking much more realistic than they would have otherwise, and exceptionally impressive for the time in replays. You can pick from any teams of 1996 season, create a team with your own custom players, or choose a team formed by all-star players from East or West Coast. Created players can be modified to a certain degree, and all that adds up to the replayability. Personally, I'm not big on sports, I know the rules and all, but don't watch them or play them in real life. But I do remember trying out all those first 3D sports games from EA, and surprisingly to me, I had fun playing all of them. So I can't vouch for the quality of the game for those who are into basketball, but haven't heard anyone complaining either. Unlike most people for whom first real rally championship love was Colin McRae Rally, for me it was this, Network Q RAC Rally Championship. And no wonder really, as it was developed by Magnetic Fields, the very same company that gave us all Lotus and Supercars series of games. They clearly knew their craft. Even if jump to 3D was a huge risk for them since all their previous games were entirely in 2D. Well, I'm happy to let you know that this first attempt was a success, and NQRRC is stellar. The graphics are very nice and detailed, featuring different road surfaces and weather effects, and all of those actually influence how each of 6 available cars behaves while driving. There are 28 real-life RAC rally tracks included, and an add-on released a year later that added another 10. The game is a complete package for both simulation enthusiasts and arcade racer nuts, and while objectively speaking may not be better than Colin McRae Rally, I have much fonder memories of it. Normality is one of the most unique adventure games of the 90s. It's a humorous take on George Orwell's 1984. You're Kent, an independent individual living alone in a city of Neutropolis. City controlled by a totalitarian regime that prohibits its citizens from expressing any emotions that would deviate from the so-called norm, especially happiness. And that is precisely why you were arrested, for whistling a happy tune. In prison you learn that there's the resistance group somewhere in the city that is looking to overthrow the dictatorship. You decide to help. Normality is a point-and-click adventure game made entirely in 3D in first-person perspective and basing most of its puzzles on inventory management. It's an interesting story with an unusual presentation, but I suppose it's cause it tried to stay relevant in a world where FPS games reigned by using the same perspective. Did it work? Hard to tell, but the game itself is quite fun. Phantasmagoria: A Puzzle of Flesh is not a sequel to year prior's Phantasmagoria, but rather a standalone follow-up telling a completely different but similarly disturbing story. And believe it or not, but A Puzzle of Flesh is actually quite chilling and even scary at times. You're Curtis, an everyday Joe that had anything but everyday life. Your mother went insane and it drove her to commit suicide, and your father was shot. On top of that, you've spent most of your adolescent years in closed-off asylum. Now, as you're out, a grown-up and working, so that you wouldn't thought that your life could be too easy, and mysterious murders seem to be breaking out all around you. It's all grim and dark already, and it's what you learn before you even start playing. A Puzzle of Flesh is much more of an adventure game than the previous Phantasmagoria was, meaning more attention is put on conversations, inventory puzzles and story building rather than just the FMV sequences. Which there are still quite a lot of, but they're not the main means of storytelling. If you dig horror movies or games, Puzzle of Flesh is worth your time. Privateer 2: The Darkening is much more of a Wing Commander game than Privateer. Let me explain. Privateer 2 forgoes on nearly limitless freedom of the first game in favor of more story-based design, so it features a stellar cast of actors and plethora of FMV sequences. They're there to tell a plot and push the story forward, and this design philosophy change made it more linear but also in the same time more well told. I suppose something had to be sacrificed so that something else could be added. One way or another, even if a bit more limited than previously, the freelancing spirit of Privateer is still here, and you can still buy, sell and haul cargo between the planets and engage in everything you could before. Just not on the same scope. Privateer 2 features beautiful 3D graphics with more ships to pilot and fight against and quite a few planets to enjoy as compared to the first game. And overall, it's a blast to be had if you like space operas. The only thing I could really pick on would be the absence of random mission generator, severely reducing the potential replayability of the game. It could be argued that while Wolfenstein created the FPS genre, Doom popularized it with its polished and enjoyable design, and Quake changed it forever. It was the first ever fully 3D first-person shooter, and first that featured all of its elements built in an engine that did not use 2D sprites. So not only levels, but also all enemies and objects present in the game are polygonal, which while a bit more demanding hardware-wise, also allowed for much more realistic enemy animations and lighting, and most of all, simulated in-game physics. so fallen enemies drop to the ground more realistically, grenades bounce off the wall, just to name a few. The game consists of 4 episodes split into smaller levels. They feature many different kinds of enemies, human, monster or otherworldly, and pretty decent selection of weapons to choose from. Or to collect really, as there's not much choice, you just have to find them and pick them up. Quake was one of the first games natively offering support for multiplayer over the internet rather than just LAN, and it had 6 arena maps designed specifically for this multiplayer madness purpose. Quake was a huge stepping stone for the future of FPS games, and regardless if you liked it or not, its importance cannot be understated. Screamer 2 was my most favorite racing game of the mid to late 90s. It may have not been the most advanced technically speaking, especially closer to the end of the decade, but for me it was most fun. All because I have very fond memories of it. My father and I used to play it religiously, competing for the best times on all tracks, and it was fierce. We would switch seats and just try to beat each other's scores, and we were on such similar level that nearly every race or two one of us would overcome another. Or he was just letting me win from time to time. But I doubt that, as he was as competitive as I am. Still, it was a lot of fun and is a cool memory for me to cherish. And if I haven't bored you to death yet, let me tell you a little bit about Screamer 2. It's heaps better than already fun first game. It dropped the modern city setting for rally type of racing and features tracks that all feel entirely different. Not only presentation-wise, but also because of the types of surfaces you'll be driving on, and how they're built. They're a definite highlight of the game. The cars are not real whatsoever, but nicely and distinctly modeled and divided into 3 generic classes. Rear-wheel drive one is the fastest, forward-wheel drive is the easiest to steer, especially on those tight muddy turns, and 4-wheel drive is somewhere in between. Screamer 2 was fun, challenging and most importantly really addictive. And the fact that it added a split-screen couch multiplayer was just a cherry on this already overwhelmingly sweet pie of a racer. That said, that split screen in SVGA required a beast of a system. My AMD K5 PR133 with 16MB of EDRAM and S3 Trio 64V plus 1MB SVGA card was not able to offer a playable experience. It was jerky and unpleasant. At the first glance, Seek and Destroy may seem difficult, especially few level scenes, as it's very hectic and a lot can happen on a screen at once. But if you give it time and familiarize yourself with both controls and where to use each of available weapons, you'll learn to appreciate it. Seek and Destroy is a multi-way scrolling arcade shooter that was originally released 3 years earlier on the Amiga. And since PC had all that time to improve it, I'm kinda disappointed that it really didn't in any meaningful way. But you know what, despite all that, it's actually still pretty fun and addictive. I can't tell why, but that chaotic destruction and copter chases are pretty enjoyable. While the mission objectives in theory are quite varied, I've noticed that most of the time if you just go to your target mark and kill everything there, you'll complete the mission. So take it as you want to, but I suppose for what it is, so a fast arcade shooter, it's irrelevant what those imaginary objectives really are. Sensible Golf is nowhere near the quality of Sensible Soccer. But given the development hell it apparently went through, it's understandable. And also it does not mean that it's a bad game, because it's not, it just lacks that final finishing touch. Perhaps a couple of months more of development would have gave it that last layer of polish, perhaps. One way or another, it's a pretty enjoyable arcade take on the Golf with unnecessarily difficult putting mechanics. So not gonna lie, while it can be played alone, because of that one single issue, it's much better played with up to 3 other players. Because then you're placed on the same difficulty scale, all tackling with the ungodly tough putting. Against a CPU who doesn't seem to have any issues with it, it just seems unfair. All in all, it's a pretty good title when played with friends, but easily a skippable one when approaching it alone. Silent Hunter, a classic World War II submarine simulator, is one of the few titles from the mid-90s that could compete with ingenious aces of the deep. It features outstanding SVGA graphics, a realistic approach to the sub-simulation and addictive gameplay. If you cross that initial point of entry that some of those more intricate simulations have. Most of the game takes place on the Pacific Theater and feature 9 patrol zones, from the Solomons to the Sea of Japan. Silent Hunter can be played in single missions or a much more difficult and demanding, but also more rewarding, fun campaign, where each sync and successful mission earns you medals and commendations. And there's a lot that the game can offer, so there's hardly a chance that you'll find yourself bored with it, especially that there are numerous subs that you'll get to lead, having chance to switch every few successful patrols. It's worth mentioning a realistic ship specifications and behavior of weapons too. A torpedo can be a dud, for instance, so a situation where you're going for the hit as you've aimed that bad boy as best as you could on one of those more dangerous enemy vessels, just to end up with completely nothing, is not unheard of. It's just a dot that failed to explode upon impact. Silent Hunter is a really good sub-simulation, and I'm sure I don't have to convince fans of the naval combat about that, but if you're not one and are on the fence about the game, it's worth giving it a shot, even if it's quite difficult. In 1996, when we had two new modern FIFAs and Actua Soccer, and those more hardcore pixel lovers kept getting refreshes of rapidly aging sensible soccer to break their keyboards and joysticks on, was there a space for another football game? Most would probably say that there wasn't and that there were no other good enough contenders to even be considered. But I disagree. After seeing a football game in the arcades and sinking numerous coins trying to master it few years before, I always wanted a similar fast-paced NBA jam like in its design football title to play at home. And funny thing, I don't even remember the name of that game from the arcades today. Maybe Super Sidekicks, maybe something else. One way or another, nothing like it was available on PC. Sure, we had simulations like FIFA and Actua, but that's not what I was after. Enter Soccer Superstars. It definitely wasn't as polished, fast and advanced as the elusive arcade game was, but was close enough. So yeah, I liked Soccer Superstars. Feel free to disagree. Anyway, you can choose from 32 international teams to play in either friendly games or a cup tournaments, and you can play with another player or versus CPU. But there's also a seldom present in other games demo mode, where you can watch CPU play out all matches. Which, while not necessary in a game like that, but a welcome addition nonetheless. Before each match you're also free to set up a formation, modify lineups and tweak game length. I liked Soccer Superstars, you don't have to, but I believe that while not a simulation, it was objectively good enough to be mentioned here. Steel Panthers II Modern Battles is a turn-based tactical strategy game on a hexagonal grid map, covering conflicts real and fictional between 1950 and 2000. The historical ones are Korea 1950, Golan Heights 1973 and Desert Storm 1991. Fictional ones cover more modern period and are Germany 1980, where you have to stop Soviet advances through Fulda, China War 1997, where you defend Taiwan from Chinese army's invasion, and Okinawa 1998, which assumes that the war between US and Japan resumed after years of peace. Technically speaking, there's not much difference between first Steel Panthers and this. The interface and engine are nearly the same, and there are very small improvements over the previous title. What the game did improve considerably upon, however, is the map. That can be a quite bit bigger. There's more kinds of units to take part in battles and they all have more statistic values. But all the small differences aside, it's as good and deep of the game as previous was, and it's equally as fun. So there's no wonder that it was largely a successful release that spawned a follow-up a few years later. Fans of tactical strategies will love it, others should approach it on case-by-case basis. Supercars International is basically Amiga's earlier Supercars 2 with added another thin layer of paint. It polished the graphics to use full 256 colors palette, added new soundtrack, allowed for customization of amount of laps of each race and racing in reversal, and expanded amount of minigames between the races. For some it may be disappointing, for others it may be something they'd hope for. For me, well, I was indifferent to it. Not because Supercars International is a bad game, quite the opposite. I was just not expecting it to release on PC, so it was more of a surprise than anything else. In essence, it's the same game where you get to compete in racing seasons, upgrading or changing your car between the races and arming it to withstand and dispose of your opponents. All in a top-down 2D presentation that's perhaps not too sophisticated, but in the same time it's clear and easy to comprehend throughout the whole race without any distractions. Mid-90s it seems were a lot about that racing with guns vibe. Hard to tell why, but it's not the last year we've got games like that. And just a short year later we've received a true classic, Carmageddon. That's a story for another video though. Syndicate Wars is a successor to original Syndicate, but it's much more of an action-oriented title rather than the party strategic one that the first one was. After fall of most syndicates in the first game, Eurocorp is the only one that's left and it holds a firm grasp on the world. The only force that stands to oppose it is the religious cult Church of the New Epoch. And you can play for either of the sides through 60 action-packed missions spread over 30 different cities. You're still in control of a team of 4 cyborgs and still have to lay destruction and domination to any and all enemies that you'll meet. This time, however, the game being more arcadish, it reads of ammo and all weapons are energy-based, so when depleted, just need few seconds to recharge. The graphics of Syndicate Wars is a whole generation better than that of original, featuring a full 3D cities with a camera that can be rotated at will. On one hand it makes the cities feel more realistic, on another it doesn't change the fact that very often those high buildings all around you just obstruct enemies and you may learn that they're there not before approaching, but by being shot at. Taking place in provinces of High Rock and Hammerfell of Tamriel, Daggerfall is a successor to Bethesda's Arena, and named after High Rock's capital city. Like with most Bethesda's games, you can be sure of three things: that it released full of bugs, which it did, and it took several patches originally to get it to the point where it would not hang seemingly on random; that is an open-ended title that allows for complete freedom of choice of where to go and what to do next, and does not require you to follow main storyline whatsoever; and last but not least, you can bet that the game is big. And it is. Huge, actually. I believe that to this day it offers the single biggest game world of any game ever made that was not set in space, even if majority of this world is generated at random. Daggerfall, in fact, may be the biggest Bethesda's game content-wise too. It allows you to join many political or social organizations, so guilds, or try to get better and better pursuing power of your own. You can buy houses, horses, and even ships. You can become a werewolf, wereboar, or a vampire. Sadly, can't become a spider pig, but that's supposedly coming in Elder Scrolls 6. And you can interact with literally thousands of NPCs. Granted, given the game's random nature, most of these interactions are superficial, but they're there, so shouldn't be ignored. The game does not skip on details with your character either. It can come from any of the 9 provinces of Tamriel, and they don't only differ in race, but also kind of character they are, meaning not all are human. And there's also 18 classes to choose from with numerous primary and secondary skills. When you create your character, you can skip picking a particular class, however, and make your own by selecting all skills and abilities by hand. Not many games from other developers allowed for such freedom of choice, and not many do even to this day. Especially that it's a two-edged sword. You can create a character that could potentially be much better than any of the ones included by default, but you can also make one that's going to end up being borderline unplayable. All skills, primary and secondary, are raised with use rather than arbitrary levels, so the more you jump, the higher you'll be able to jump, the more you swing your sword, the stronger the swings will be and will connect more often, and so on. It's the best system that any RPG could use in my opinion, as it mimics real life as best as it's possible. The combat is entirely real-time, and use your melee and ranged weapons by holding the right mouse button and performing various moves with your mouse. This was rather new and interesting idea in 1996, but also a really bad one. It made the combat unnecessarily stressful, and you could never really tell if a miss was a lack of your skill or your failure at swinging. Some things are better left less realistic than others, it seems. The game features magic too, and upon getting Mages Guild membership you'll be able to not only buy spells, but also receive training and make your own spells as well. They help with identification of magical weapons too, so that's also worth keeping in mind. Graphically, Daggerfall is not a show-off, but given the scope of the game, I think it can be forgiven, as the sheer amount of content will draw you in regardless of how the presentation itself looks like. I haven't said anything about the story yet, as you may have noticed, and I won't. I won't rob you of experiencing it firsthand. The Settlers II Veni Vidi Vici, with a very fitting Julius Caesar's quote meaning "I came, I saw, I conquered," is a kingdom management mixed with real-time strategy, and an excellent example of how sequels should be made. In fact, it should be used in game design classes to teach how to make a follow-up. It is also, at least in my opinion, the very best out of all Settlers games. It can be played as either series of missions forming a campaign, or in a free mode that allows for complete customization of starting parameters, and even playing without any opponents for a relaxing, hassle-free experience. With core gameplay's supply and demand mechanics remain largely unchanged, most other aspects of the Settlers have been heavily improved as compared to the first game. The easiest to spot would obviously be sound design and graphics, which are on another level. I mean, Settlers II could even be run in 1280 by 960, which was 4 times the resolution most other SVGA games settled for. The animations have been smoothed out as well, adding many frames to them so that they would be as fluid as your system would allow them to be. And that's worth keeping in mind, cause higher fidelity obviously came with a higher performance cost. Settlers II features 4 distinctive national aesthetics for 4 included nations of Romans, Nubians, Vikings and Japanese. And the battle system have been improved, adding scouts and stationary offensive weaponry. The most important feature for the game, however, is a grand return of split-screen multiplayer that was hugely popular in the first game. It's an incredibly fun feature, one that prolongs the life of Settlers II more than all other changes and new additions combined. and one that did not reappear in any future games in the series. Settlers 2 is incredible, and if you at least have a passing interest in management or strategy games, definitely try it out. And if you have a friend that does too, and you also happen to have an access to an older PC with 2 separate COM ports to connect 2 mice, you're in countless hours of fun. Tomb Raider is arguably one of the most important games not only of 1996, but gaming. It was the first full 3D third-person perspective arcade adventure title that gained such a huge cult-like following. I suppose it can be partly attributed to the protagonist, Miss Lara Croft, and her busty chest. But if I was to simplify it to just that, I would be doing this game a disservice. Sure, Lara, given the amount of available at the time polygons, definitely looks like a woman, but she's also a charismatic, interesting Indiana Jones-like character that stands on her own. But she's the only one of 3 reasons Tomb Raider was an immense success. The other 2 being level design and gameplay, and the first one is truly a sight to behold. Well, perhaps it isn't anymore, but in 1996 it was awakening imaginations of millions of players who got the arcade Indiana Jones game they always wanted, but never got a chance to experience, with all the treasures, traps, exotic enemies, tombs, and even secrets to discover. And gameplay was even better. In this new, expertly executed full 3D environment, Lara could easily run around, jump, climb, swim, and fight through hundreds of enemies. And all those moves were so fluid, so lifelike, most of us couldn't believe it, and everyone who could run it at a reasonable frame rates played Tomb Raider, whether they liked the arcade games or not. Lara can wield and use different kinds of weapons and items, and switching between them is just a matter of a key press. Tomb Raider was a hit, a huge one. It was one of those games that changed the world and pop up maybe once or twice per decade. It was the same thing for 3D third-person arcade adventure games that Doom was to first-person shooters. I loved Back to the Future movies, all of them, even the third one that most, for whatever the reason, don't seem to enjoy. I did, and I wish there was more. But there aren't, so I'm happy that there were at least the 3. And the cast? Oh my days, they couldn't have picked better. Marty, Doc, and Biff, great timeless characters. But since there were no new movies on the horizon in 1996, especially because of Michael J. Fox's condition, when I saw that Christopher Lloyd would be a part of a game, I was instantly curious. Toonstruck is a point-and-click adventure in vein of earlier humorous LucasArts games made in reverse Who Framed Roger Rabbit style, meaning that all the backgrounds and characters were animated and only Christopher Lloyd was digitized. He plays Drew Blanc, a cartoonist who gets trapped in a cartoon world of his own creation. The land is overrun by an evil doctor and Drew has to stop him. The game is full of odd and quirky cartoon humor, and the puzzles are fun and sorta make sense, if you keep in mind that everything in Toonstruck is based on weird cartoon logic. My dear viewers, my audience, my friends. First of all, congratulations on having plenty enough patience to go through all those games and still keep watching. Not many do so, most skip to those titles that interest them and ignore the rest. Unless you've done just that, then just keep in mind that you might have missed a true gem of a game somewhere before. One that does not look like much but is surprisingly extremely playable, and one of the best games that 1996 spawned. And Triplane Turmoil is precisely that. A game that looks meh, but has a secret. And that secret is that it's probably, while being one of the simplest games on this list, one of the best multiplayer experiences of 1996. In theory, in Triplane Turmoil you're to fly a World War I style triplane in a hypothetical scenarios for either England, Germany, Japan or Finland in 5 mission campaigns for each country. But believe me, you can skip that. They're okay, but not groundbreaking and definitely not what the game is best at. Where Triplane Turmoil spreads its bedpan wings is a couch multiplayer, where even up to 4 players can compete against each other in a series of simultaneous 4-player dogfights in high resolution on a screen split in 3 to fit all the planes and the hectic action. It's fun, arcade but skill-based romp where the best always wins. For instance, it may be worth to cut the engines to fool the opponent to fly over you, just to kick them back on and attack him from behind. And it's just one of many fun tactics that this game allows for. On the surface it's incredibly basic, but the execution of the multiplayer in Triplane Turmoil is just perfect. Especially if you manage to play it against 3 others. If you don't, it's fun against a single friend too, just not as blood pressure raising. Ultimate Soccer Manager 2 is my most favorite football manager for DOS. I know that there were also championship managers available at the time, 2 of them actually, but they were glorified Excel sheets, and while on the purely coaching aspect of the game hardly anything could compare to them, Ultimate Soccer Manager 2 offered more hands-on approach to management of, well, everything. The team, the stadium and all the items that are sold in the shops at it, the trainings, down to creating your own tactics and team plays, to control of the matches where you could influence the outcome, changing a lot of things on the fly. Championship Manager is for football what, let's say, a Pool of Radiance was for RPGs. And using this logic, Ultimate Soccer Manager 2 is Diablo. Beautiful, easy to control and comprehend, and intuitive to play, fun game for up to 8 players that's not for hardcore sports fans, but those that are either new to the genre or want to have a bit more easy time playing. It doesn't try to compete with Championship Manager because it doesn't have to. It targets a different audience, and at that it succeeds, offering very well thought out, dead simple to figure out interface and stellar gameplay. And dare I say, risking your wrath, that Ultimate Soccer Manager 2 aged way better than Championship Manager 2 did, and can still be enjoyed even today. Is it okay if I just say that Wing Commander 4 The Price of Freedom is the best out of all Wing Commander games, and a culmination of the series so that we could move on? Okay. Let's see. By 1996, Origin were the absolute masters of interactive movie games. They found the perfect genre, the perfect formula, they've hired only the best actors and worked off the best scripts. And most of all, they figured out the ratio, the balance, the golden point between gameplay and cinematics. And even though the interactive movie games are nearly non-existent today, it could be argued that they peaked in 1996 with Wing Commander 4. Better? Can I go now? No? Seriously? Okay, I'll carry on. The Price of Freedom, same as previous games in the series, is a space combat simulation at heart, and you follow the campaign based on story told via cinematics. It's in a dynamic mission structure, so the one that we like the most, responding with next mission's objectives and difficulty based on your performance in the previous one. And they're not only kill missions anymore and can even be recon flights, salvage, capture or infiltrate ones too. Some you have to approach without radar, at others you'll be flying close to blinding nebulas. There's hardly ever going to be time to get bored. Wing Commander 4 picked what was best in the last 3 games and made the brand new one out of all of it, while adding features. It looks great in high res, it sounds great, and most of all, plays amazingly too. Witchhaven 2 Blood Vengeance, same as the first game, is a medieval fantasy themed first-person action/shooter. You're once again Noble Knight Grondoval, the hero of the previous outing, and after defeating the villain of the first game, you now have to stop the evil witch from carrying a titular blood vengeance in revenge for slaying her sister. While I found it to be a good conclusion to the story, it did not gain critical acclaim and was criticized for odd behaving controls, weak enemy AI, and not being anywhere near as playable as the other first-person shooters of the time. The gameplay is largely the same as before with some slight changes, for instance ability to wield 2 weapons at once, one in each hand, or to use shields. Graphics have been lifted a tad too, and difficulty raised to challenge the players that by 1996 were already well versed in FPS titles. One change, however, was something I didn't find to be a good choice, and its enemies. Most of them are now men, and monsters are definitely in a minority. Witchhaven 2 came with build editor, however, allowing for creation of your own levels, so even if you didn't like the ones included, if you had a bit of time on your hands and some skill to pair it with, you could easily make your own. I didn't dislike Witchhaven same as most critics did, but in the same time, it's not a game I will be returning to anytime soon. Z or Z, depends on what part of the world you're from, is a 20 level strong real-time strategy with a lot of personality and humor, played over 5 distinctive planets. That humor is especially prominent in cutscenes, but can be experienced to some degree during gameplay too. The objective of each mission is to destroy enemy base, in the same time preventing them from doing the same to you. But Z is not the same as any other run-of-the-mill RTS. It emphasizes territorial control and capturing manufacturing plants, rather than building a huge army and stacking up kills. So it's a balancing act all throughout. Your army is comprised of robots, and there are 6 different ones, each with a unique weapon, armor and speed. And they can be used as is or in vehicles such as jeeps and tanks. It's an interesting take on RTS genre and one filled with tongue-in-cheek humor that most would probably enjoy. Wow, holy YouTube's new guidelines, Batman. What a year, right? Who would have thought? And there actually was as many classics released as less known games were, that for whatever the reason didn't become as popular as they deserved to be and henceforth became the elusive hidden gems. I think it may have been overall Windows 95 adoption that started pushing away DOS to the background of gaming, especially that it was actually an incredible OS compared to previous 3.11, modern in looks and way it operated, and pretty darn fast on modern systems too. Who knows? One way or another we've got one more of these DOS videos to complete this gaming series. 1997 may not have very many games released for it, but I will find and research all the best ones, so make sure to come back for it. It should be out in a couple of weeks at most, or already is if you're from the future. Well, your present, my at the time of this recording future. Whatever. If you have memories of any special or great games from 1997 and would like to share it, make sure to hit me up in the comments below, so that we could chat about it. If you like the video, smash those likes, subscribe and bell icons below. They're just a few clicks away, shouldn't take you too long, and I promise I won't flood your subscription box. But each of those single clicks is actually a huge help for me and a sign to gods of YouTube to make my videos tad more visible. And if you're in a more giving mood, I have a YouTube memberships and Patreon too. I post updates on upcoming videos, my ideas and planned changes on Patreon often, and videos land there approximately a day early. So I would appreciate that too. But if you can't or don't want to bother with it, don't worry about it, all my videos will always be free on YouTube anyway, and a like and subscription are great too. For now, however, have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Peace.